Welcome back to Mornings with the Mayor. I'm your host, Mayor Robert C. Dye. We're back taking another inside look into what's happening in Farmers Branch. We just passed July 31st, which you know what that means. It means we're right in the middle of budget season. As such, this year's budget has a lot of moving parts, a lot of considerations, and a lot to digest. And that's why I felt it prudent to invite today's guest to share some insights into this year's budget process, our esteemed, talented, and gregarious Director of Finance, the wonderful Miss Sherrelle Evans-Jones. Sherrelle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always good to get to chat with you. So, what you're in a different situation than a lot of us because your husband is on City Council in Louisville. So, how do you find time to escape from not only local politics because you not only get it here at the city, but you also get it at home, or do y'all just agree to not talk politics at all?
We keep it separate. We definitely keep it separate. You know, because it's difficult to bring work home and have it all overlap with some things that he does within Louisville. But we definitely job of keeping it separate. It's funny.
Gotcha.
Sometimes we come home from work. It's like, how was your day? It's like, oh, I can't talk to you about that. Like that's routinely something that happens in our household.
Yeah, that we need to keep that separate. I'm not going to talk about that. But now that you've kind of delivered the draft budget, and I know we're going to be at our budget retreat soon and talking about a lot of the items going on in the city and a lot of hard decisions we need to make. But is the hard work over for you now, or is it you just need the rest of me and council to make some decisions, or is there still some tinkering and product of work that needs to be delivered on your side?
The heavy lifting is definitely past in terms of getting all of the pieces of the puzzle synthesized into one product. So, that was a huge weight off of our shoulders to deliver that this past Friday. But this budget is kind of different in that there are two very big moving pieces that still exist that normally don't exist once we deliver the budget. And those pieces being the open question about the library debt, which has been factored into the budget, but could be easily removed. And then the open question regarding our property taxes in terms of the DCAD certification of those values. We received a certification of about 2/3 of the value.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we deliver the budget, we have the full tax roll certified, but due to COVID and timing with SB2, it just has taken DCAT a little bit more time to get through all of those protests.
Yeah, and I hear you. I mean, when SB2 was passed last year, it was kind of, okay, well, we're going to figure out how we're going to work the budget process to stay in that confines, but then COVID hit and now it's kind of been relaxed. And so you're kind of going back and forth with rules we've planned for, but rules have now been relaxed, which, thankfully that allows us a little bit more flexibility and opportunity in such a tough time. But, how have you guys planned for not only that, but then considering that the county hasn't delivered the full certified tax rolls, which I think will come, 3 weeks into August 20th, something around that date is what we're looking at. How have you guys kind of accounted for that in terms of delivering the draft budget to the council so far, just so that we feel like this is where it's going to shake out and these are the moves that we can make for the city?
So what we've done this year, which, this is unprecedented to not have the full tax roll at this point, but you do the best you can with the information that you have. From our conversations with the experts at, in terms of the valuation at DCAD, that 1/3 that is still under protest, we factored in about 85% of that as being valuations that'll ultimately be upheld. And what we're doing is we're continuing to monitor that. I probably should have turned my ringer off of
Okay.
We factor in about 80 to 85% of that in terms of our overall valuation within the budget, and we're continuing to monitor that as we go forward.
Gotcha. And I mean, that's just kind of, I know people are going to wonder about that. How can you make decisions when you don't have all the information? It's kind of, we can make some reasonable assessments of where we need to go based on past data.
Yes,
Yeah.
because we have enough historical information to at least guide us in a direction, and we, know the pieces at this point to continue to keep our eye on that have the ability to continue to move.
Yeah. And, a lot of the guiding process for this budget and things that we're looking at and what staff has to prepare for are conversations that happen in our strategic planning session. And so, what's the driving force behind that being the crucial step in how budgets are developed and where we're going and the decisions that are being made? Because I think a lot of people feel, we can just make decisions, which we can, at the table when we're talking about the budget, but a lot of what's planned for and the way that we've calculated what we need to get us through the next year and the amount of money that needs to come in, that is based off a lot of those conversations. So how important are those conversations to you all?
They are critical. That January, February timeframe when we get together with council, have that strategic planning session, all of us are like, like majorly keyed into what things are key and top of mind for council priority. We're listening and we're working to try to synthesize different points and viewpoints to make sure that when we come out of that session that we have an idea of these are kind of some cohesive strategies that overall council wants to take. And then from that point, we work to figure out, because some things have a financial impact. So the management team, the directors, et cetera, we work to figure out what the financial impact of those things are. And they are then reflected in the budget that we put forth to council. So ideally, the budget should look like what we talked about in January in terms of overall direction.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we'd like to see too. And a lot of that's provided in that narrative that we get to read of, hey, this is where we're starting from, this is where we're going, this is what we want to accomplish, these are the impacts that happened. And there's a lot of impacts this year that we definitely had to work through. But, in terms of people who are just kind of wanting to look into the budget and dive into it and maybe understand a little bit more of how the dollars flow and what we're trying to accomplish and opportunities to make adjustments or maybe reevaluate some things, where would you focus your energy when you're looking at a budget to get a good sense of what's going on, to feel like you kind of have control over it in terms of, this makes sense to me and it's not confusing? Because I know when I first came in, y'all's budget process is very different than a budget process that I see in the business world. And so, trying to flip back and forth, understanding transfers and all that stuff, it's interesting. And so, for someone that came from the public realm as well in the nonprofit sector, because you worked over at Clyde Warren, but how has that transition been? And like I said, what's been the thing that you focus on when you're trying to understand where we are and where our city's going?
Well, what I would advise individuals that are interested in the budget to do, because like, for instance, this is the printed copy of our Post-it note, sorry, but this is the printed copy and it's kind of a robust document of our current year budget. That can be overwhelming. And so what I normally advise people to do just as a start is within that budget, there is a thing that we refer to as the transmittal letter. It's right at the front. And what we work really hard to do is summarize what all is going on, what are all the key changes, what are the philosophies and key assumptions. And I would recommend anybody who, especially if you're not really like a numbers driven person like I might be, I would recommend that you start with just giving that document a good read. And then therein, you can also just flip through some of the summary pages within the budget. There's a general fund revenue summary, a general fund expenditure summary, and that kind of gives you an idea of what key line items are and how they might be changing from year to year. And you can kind of get a scope of how those numbers are moving. The budget process, definitely in terms of, my prior background in nonprofit and public accounting, the budget process with a governmental entity is definitely a lot more robust. And it includes a lot more different fund accounting than you might see in your typical nonprofit. And it's a lot longer of a process, but you are working with a lot of different funds, and you're working with public funds. So you want to make sure that people understand what's happening, have an opportunity to see it, to comment, and to get comfortable with what's happening with the finances overall within a city.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've always wondered too, is just because it is daunting to just look at, right? And
Yeah.
anyone could be overwhelmed by the amount of information that's
Yeah.
in the budget, that I think people might be nervous or have a little bit of hesitancy to come to a council meeting to speak on some of these items, just because there is so much. And I know oftentimes you hear it a lot in council meetings, like, we hear from residents all throughout the year about the ways we're, misallocating money or doing other things. But then when the budget season comes, rarely do we hear from them. I think over the last 3 years, 6 residents might have come forward during that time to speak to different things that are going on. And we'd love to hear from more of them. And I think, maybe that is part of the hurdle that people have to get past, is, understanding the CAFR and the budget is definitely tough. And when I speak to CAFR, I guess it's the certified audited financial.
It's basically our audited financial statements.
Yeah, and that's where, but I notice that I spend a lot of time when I'm looking through the budget in the footnotes and in all the exhibits in the back, because that's where I can get most of the information in terms of, how have we allocated funding over time for certain capital projects, and how does this tie back? Because it kind of, in that aspect, seems like a 10K, where you're looking into a company's documents.
Like a 10K.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily done to be intimidating to the public. There are certain regulatory reasons why we put certain schedules in, just like with the 10Q or a 10K, where those documents are really robust because they want to make sure that all the key disclosures are made to the public who are purchasing those stocks. Same kind of thing. There are certain regulatory reasons that we have all of these different kinds of schedules in, but there's always some sort of an overarching memorandum, some sort of an overarching schedule that will just kind of set the tone for what's all happening within either the CAFR or the budget document.
Yeah, just so people, I think they probably like, well, why isn't it more simple? Why is it not? Well, when you look at a lot of cities do it this way, they're more detailed. But what people don't realize is that year over year, your department, you and, the department before, consistently receive excellence and transparency awards for the way that we put this document together and its ease of use. And you don't achieve that without some level of, based on all the other documents being out there, this is regarded as an excellent form in the way that we put it together so that our public can review it and digest it. And so, I do want to, commend you guys on that, because you did receive it last year, and I'm assuming you're going to receive it again this year.
Yes, we're working hard to have that. And what we also do is we try our best to take the draft of the budget and make it even approachable in a different format. So you might not be a letter reader, you might not want to get into all of the financial statements that might be included within the budget, but we actually do produce and have done so for the past couple of years, a budget video that just kind of takes 1,000-foot at the budget and what's changing and what things that people can expect to see happening within the city as a result of the budget items that have been included or proposed in the budget. So, that's even a third way that we try really hard to make sure that we meet people where they are and their desire to understand, their desire and their ability to understand this particular financial information.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a key piece. And I know you work closely with Tom and his team on preparing that and making something that, hey, it's easy to watch. It's a long enough amount of time that, people can stay tuned in, but, we give you all the high level information of what you need to know about what's changing other than the standard stuff that we just take care of year over year. And so it's great to see that, and great to see that those efforts have been made, because you're truly making the best effort to make it easier for our city to understand exactly what it is we're doing each year, and how we're managing the city funds to just keep things going. But, how do you feel about this year's budget? And was it a little bit more of a challenge than budgets in the past, just because of all the things going on in the country right now that you have to deal with in terms of COVID and the impacts that we're seeing, not only to business, at sales tax, but hotel, motel, and some of those items.
Man, this year's budget process has been pretty crazy. And, just kind of getting through it with the imperfect information that we have at this point, and making sure that council and the public understands which of those pieces are going to continue to move and why, and making some estimates in a period where you really don't have the history to tell you how numbers are going to move as a result of COVID. When we had that May presentation to talk about how we anticipated our financial results to look as a result of COVID, one of the things that I talked about in that presentation to council was, these numbers and these estimates are kind of presuming that we have a COVID problem and then we begin to come back out. Now, financial problem on top of financial problem, we continue to have to analyze those results, figure out where we're headed, figure out if that estimate that we initially made is still good. So it causes you to constantly reassess over and over again as new data comes in.
Yeah. And I mean, that assessment's still changing. I mean, I look at, we're still waiting for sales tax numbers to come in, and kind of what we've gauged is we're about 6% behind where we were last year. But how are you guys looking at that forecast going out another year? Because it's down 6% right now, I mean, do we assume we're going to ramp back up to prior levels over the course of 1 year? Is it going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years before we get back? What kind of strategy are you using to estimate that and calculate that out going forward in terms of calculating our sales tax?
Okay, so on sales tax, this is one of the big revenue items. This is the one that's the most difficult to predict because it's largely functioned on consumer spending, how people feel, how much money people have in their pockets, so to speak, and their desire and their ability to be able to spend it. And so what we do is we have looked at our current trends, which 6% you mentioned of a decrease so far. That actually compared to others in our area, we're actually doing fairly well with just having that small amount of decrease. You have some other cities that are looking at 15 and 20% type reduction in that sales tax number. And I think that largely it has to do, and the benefit to Farmers Branch is it largely has to do with the fact that the types of businesses that we have, I don't know the right term, but they're fairly recession proof, things like security companies and, not as much, we're not as heavy on, discretionary type businesses within our community, such as furniture, things that people might tighten up on during a downturn. So we looked at all of those past trends, and overall, I believe our number that we're estimating for this current year is about $1 million decrease on our sales tax revenue. Just as a result of COVID. We do anticipate that probably toward the back end of this upcoming fiscal year, we'll start to, come back out of this economic downturn that we're in. But the name of the game with respect to revenues and estimating is you never want the tail to wag the dog. You never want to you don't want to overestimate those revenues because you got expenses that are depending on them. So you tend to want to make as a realistically conservative estimate on revenues, which is what we believe we've done with that sales tax number.
Yeah, and I know some, and if I get too far out here, I know there's some cities that have taken the approach that in terms of sales tax, they look at it as, look, we're not going to increase more than 3% a year on that number, but anything that comes above and beyond that is moved into a general fund or earmarked for other things that they might be looking to do as, hey, this is good news money type of opportunity. What else could we do? And I mean, have you talked to other directors in kind of the area and what other strategies they kind of use for such a number that is so it's a volatile number. I mean, like you said, you don't know what's going to happen. We would assume, it was the housing crash in 2007 and 2008 that took everything away. It was 9/11 in 2001. It was a disease and pandemic this year that kind of crippled. And so you never know where it's going to come from or what it's going to be. I don't know in terms of planning, like, how do you look at different strategies that, might be best to put in place? Or is it just, we do a good job working with consultants, working with historic numbers, and just kind of having a good feel of where we're going in the future to kind of gauge that number for our budget each year.
So I definitely do visit with some of my counterparts in other cities to figure out if they're doing different strategies to estimate their sales tax revenue. Some of those things are definitely helpful to, glean new information, but some of the pieces to the puzzle that matter in terms of sales tax that are going to be different from city to city. So it makes it a little bit difficult to just take their strategy and go, oh, I'll do that, because the mix of who you have in terms of your businesses is going to matter greatly in terms of the types of revenue that you're looking at, as well as the DART, whether or not you are a DART stop city or not, also factors into, how much of that sales tax revenue you're pulling in. So it's always good to visit with other municipalities and my counterparts who are directors of finance or CFOs. But you definitely I have to take that with a grain of salt and figure out the ways to possibly take some of what they're doing, incorporate some of what they're doing into how we evaluate that, but making sure that it's relative to the matters going on within Farmers Branch as a whole.
Yeah, and that's important because, as we say a lot, right? Each city has its own unique challenges and obstacles that they have to overcome because, I look at a city like Addison, which is mostly, they have a lot of retail, hotel, and entertainment, right? And so when something like that,
which is fantastic until now.
Yes. And I mean, there's the trade-offs too. And you have cities like Irving that are in similar situations that, they use those assets that they have because they're a larger city and can use some of that stuff to structure things a lot differently. And so, yeah, it's always a fine balance of best practice works there. But, like you said, you have to break it back down into why is that best practice work there? And it wouldn't be best practice to implement here. And so, it's good that, we have those conversations, and I love that I'm always hearing our staff and directors are coordinating with a lot of different cities all the time to ensure that we're moving hand in hand and forward and thinking about things the right way in terms of macro level stuff that's going to impact us on a micro level.
The good part about cities is that, largely we're not in competition with each other. Not in the way that Pepsi versus Coke, some for-profit businesses might be. And so that makes us really able and really willing to share best practices, share information, et cetera, because by and large, we're not necessarily directly at odds or in competition with one another. It's a great spirit of camaraderie amongst my counterparts with other cities.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, the only competition we have is when we're trying to throw out some economic development incentives.
Correct.
And
Correct.
The city does have that extra cent and we don't. Yeah. So, but, how have we kind of looked at hotel motel fund this year? Because I know that one has probably impacted it the most, but, unfortunately that's kind of a discretionary fund that, is siloed for certain activities and apart from the general fund and some other ways that we raise revenue for the city. So just trying to figure out how you guys are working through that and then planning for the next year or several years down the road because of what happened this year with the coronavirus.
So that's the one in particular, when you think about the particular areas of revenue that we talked about could have trouble as a result of coronavirus, that's the one that's getting hit pretty hard. Yeah. In this year's budget, we have estimated about a 45% decrease in revenue. so to about a $1.6 million number. I'm not looking at it right now, just kind of from memory. um, and so to that end, it is definitely a big drop in planned revenue. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is, as you mentioned in your question, these things are siloed into different funds. And so the types of activities that are planned for that hotel motel fund have to do with incentivizing travel and other activities like that in our area. That's one of the major areas of spending within the hotel motel fund. So to the extent that the revenue is decreased because there's not as much travel, it's natural that the incentives will contract to further, it's like the revenue feeds further activity. So we have been able to adjust, the majority of expenses have been contracting some of those incentives, encouraging that travel behavior. As hotel activity ramps up in the future and future budgets, we will be able to put some of that activity back into play.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that's kind of, we're trying to open up some events and see how those things are going to play out, in the coming year, to maybe we can start opening things back up and incentivizing some different things that could happen. I know it's a process that we all got to gauge very carefully to make sure that everyone's safety is maintained to start to open a lot of that back up. But, I know that, because those funds are siloed for certain items, that's where it's like, okay, how are we going to find new ways to bring some of that in? A lot of it's just people getting comfortable traveling again and coming back. But, we have a great team, and I know they're doing their best in trying to figure that out. And when you think about the hotel motel fund, I think about some cities that have leveraged, some of their debt against some of that revenue, which luckily we have not. But it reminds me of our current debt levels and how we compare to other cities. So would you consider us to be in a good financial position in terms of our debt loads right now, or are we kind of borderline towards more of the risky side? And I'm just trying to get a sense of, in terms of ratios, where do we sit compared to other cities?
Farmers Branch is really in a good position with respect to our debt ratios. Overall, this budget has just shy of $60 million of principal related to tax supported debt. And, that $60 million, oh my God, it's a huge amount if you just sit there and look at that number. But one thing to keep in mind is the debt service. That is basically akin to like your mortgage payments, so to speak, if we were to apply that to, individuals. So those mortgage payments on that approximately $60 million is less than $3 million. So $2.7 million. And what we are basically doing is we're saying that the property tax revenue that we estimate this year in this year's budget to be about $32.5 million, that less than 3 million of that, or 8% of that, is pledged to pay off debt service. I will tell you that there are a lot of other cities that have a lot higher ratio than 8% of their property tax revenue being pledged to pay off debt. I mean, looking into the 15 and 20%, et cetera. And then this is kind of, when I was thinking about that and, the opportunity to talk through debt, like one of the things that our financial advisors that we work with, Hilltop Securities, when we're doing debt issuances, they work with cities all across the Metroplex and all across the country on these types of things, debt issuances. And they prepare some comparisons, just looking at like our debt service rates compared to operating expenditures. I'll have to send you this, but I hate to put this up in front of the camera, but it's a good visual to answer your question. So can you see that?
I can.
The red line is us.
Mm-hmm.
These are all a lot of the other cities within the Metroplex. So just to kind of give you a visual, I'll share this with you so maybe you can fit within your overall presentation. But I mean, that's just kind of visually to give you an idea. really don't have a high debt ratio. And we do our very best to do as much as makes sense to do in a pay-as-you-go perspective. And then the things that are more higher dollar, infrastructure changing, longer term assets, we try to do from a financing perspective.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that we've, for a while, our city's kind of philosophy is we're more pay as you go than anything else. And a lot of that's kind of maintained. And yes, here and there, we'll pick up some debt issuances along the way for major items that need to be done, because, I look at it kind of as, if it's a long-term project that's going to outlast the length of time of the debt that's out there, then it makes sense to fund it with long-term capital instead of, hey, let's pay for it kind of as we go, because it's, hey, these are things we need now. We can spread this out. The useful life is a lot longer than, what it's going to take to pay that off. So we're getting more than we're putting out, especially in today's dollars. But, I think about when we talk about our debt, we talk about those loads, a lot of people are going to see that $30 million number that's just proposed under the capital budget. And, how are those funds coming through? I mean, a lot of them, I think half of them are pay as you go dollars that we've kind of earmarked for things we've been planning in the past, which I think I tell people to go through the footnotes and you can see what's planned 5 years out and some of these funding mechanisms to where this come from, but some of them also come from debt. And so, how do you see that playing out? And I mean, I want people to know that in terms of the debt loads that are coming for some of these projects, that they're debt that's already been passed and earmarked. And, the way we kind of tranche the money, allows us to absorb it into the debt and maintain it as we go forward. And so just want to, get a little bit more understanding of how we work that in to sustain $30 million worth of capital improvements.
Okay, so as I talk about like debt with some people from the public and some of our residents, municipal debt is akin to a mortgage payment, but it behaves a little bit differently. When you go and you get a mortgage payment, you have a set payment, that same amount over 30 years, no matter what. When cities have municipal debt, they are able to structure that debt to be paid, at certain dollar amounts during key years, and you can have it to step down into different dollar amounts in later years. It's not the same amount every time. The reason I say that is because what that enables us to do is to structure a piece of debt to have the least harmful impact to individuals and residents within the community, meaning that the debt payment can change as other pieces of debt are peeling out, so that you have a minimal tax impact to individuals. Well, that's the lens that we're always looking through when we are trying to figure out how to best structure a new piece of debt. Is how do we structure it to have the least impact to individuals? And sometimes what you'll see happen, like some years back when we talked about the quality of life bonds or the library bonds that, were up for discussion within the community in a GO format. When I'm speaking with the community about those things, what I'll do to just be as transparent as possible, because there's a lot of moving parts at the time that we're considering a vote on it, is I'm going to always disclose to you the maximum possible impact. So at one point we were talking about a possible 2 cents. You didn't see 2 cents, because when we go through and we do the actual calculations with actual money, we're looking to structure it to be as least harmful as possible to our residents and our businesses within the community.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's too is also planning and knowing, hey, we can anticipate growth, but when we decide to say, hey, we're going to look to raise, a bond, whether it's GO or CO or revenue, when we look at these, the way that we have to couch it is based on dollars today. Mm-hmm. This is what it's going to cost you. And it doesn't come with that lens of, hey, we know that, these 5 developments are going to be on the books next year and it's going to change, our valuation and what we can do, because yes, while appraisals do go up and through SB2, we should be capped at a certain level, that type of stuff, I think people don't believe us when we say, hey, we're going to try to absorb this and make it to where there's no impact to you at all. And by impact, yes, these are dollars where we probably could have reduced more. But what we're trying to say is if we can drop the tax rate to the effective rate and still roll this in theory, you're not going to be paying any more than you paid last year to accomplish all of our goals. And that's what we're constantly trying to do and get to where, hey, we're giving you a lot more with the same amount of payment, which in terms of purchasing power, that's technically giving you money back if we're able to charge you the same amount that we were charging you the last year, because there's always inflation, unless there's a downturn. But for the most part, that's kind of the case. And I know that we try to work on that and provide that to our residents. But, I think when we look at debt that, there's the consideration of debt right now. For the library, and we had to post the 45 days. No decision has been made, but staff, knowing that was something that we were looking at, rolled some of those numbers into the budget just to show what that might look like. And so, looking through kind of the draft budget, is that where that $314,000 of assumed additional debt comes from, as that would be the payment over the next year for debt that was issued. And when I run the numbers out, you detailed it out perfectly earlier that we stair step costs and do other things. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at it as, is this, if you were to just take,
looking at it in a straight line perspective,
if you were looking at a straight line, that comes to 6.2 million over 20 years. But how is that kind of layered out? Whereas the consideration was 10 million, and that impact to where we're going to absorb cost over 2 years and stair step and do some other stuff, and debt might roll off to where this is how this might look to us overall.
So that debt is structured at this. So the debt is an estimate right now. We won't know the actual payment schedule and all of those details until, should council want to continue down the path, until the morning of September 15th, when the debt would be sold. Then I have all of those particular pieces of the puzzle to then plug the actual numbers into the budget. So the estimates that we've received from our financial advisors is that the 314 would be the approximate debt service for the first year. The principal amount that we're right now estimating is just shy of $9 million, $3.8 million, because in this financial market right now, those bonds would be sold at a premium, meaning that you would 10 million for $3.8 million worth of principal. Of course, you have to pay interest over that period of time, which gets you up to the 10 million. And one other thing that's key to note about the debt is, and this gets into that whole structuring, is that the first few years of payments is somewhere in the 300,000 range, but then it kind of steps up to about 700,000 in the year 2024 and thereafter, because what we're looking at is when other pieces of debt mature and what that best load is, to make sure that it's not as harmful to our individuals living in the community as possible. Again, we won't fully know the answers to that. Oh, and one other key piece that might be helpful for you and for the public to know overall. So the morning of the 15th, the bonds are sold. Mm-hmm. So ideally, that council meeting that happens on the 15th, council members could vote that they don't want the debt. Now, that between me and you and the public looks a little crazy to the people who sold the bonds, who we sold the bonds to that morning, but it's definitely not something that's never happened before, okay? But what would have happened prior to that is certain steps that are necessary, like meeting with our rating agencies, which cost a fee, and those sorts of things. So something probably less than $50,000 worth of costs would have been expended prior to that, such that it would be helpful for us to, have a good idea, possibly coming out of the budget retreat, if we're going to proceed with this, because we start to incur those costs of issuances leading into this process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things to consider. And I think in some way too, like if you're north of 10 million, right, that's where you've got to kind of take it out to the public, go through the whole process. But are there mechanisms to where if it's less than a certain dollar amount, normally there's financial institutions that you can transact with on a bond, in a much, I guess, faster timeline than kind of the larger bonds that we looked at, like when we did the quality life bond in 2017. I mean, those processes are a little bit different. I think about the landfill expansion that we did, where we worked with, hey, we're going to build the scale house and do some other things and make improvements. And we utilized the revenue from the expanded landfill to help pay for some of that. But because the loan amount was a lower amount, we were able to go through kind of a quicker process on some of that as we went through that. Is that right, or am I not?
Yeah, no, you have it right. 10 million is about that level that you would look to. Bank qualified is what you're referring to, where you're dealing more with directly with the bank instead of selling it on the open market. Which causes you to have to go through a few more regulatory steps and take a little bit more time. This is not, this 10 million that we're talking about with the library is not one that we're working through from a bank qualified perspective. And so we still do have those steps that we would need to do in terms of meeting with our rating agencies, helping them to understand. Meeting with the rating agencies is like, that's where you get your credit score. That's where you get your credit score. Like if you were going to buy a home, et cetera, and they rate you from AAA to we're AA plus, one rung underneath AAA. And so that's what kind of determines overall that interest rate, et cetera, that you will ultimately pay on any particular notes that you receive. Yeah.
And, we're all striving for that AAA rating, and fairly certain that's going to come soon. Fairly soon. If you were to ask me, we'd already have it, but we don't get to make the decisions on why they choose what they choose. But in terms of our fund balances, right? We're kind of above the threshold that we set for our city as a reserve, and just want to talk through where our reserve is, the actual amount that's in there, and does this mean that we're over budget in most years and can afford to tighten up, or is it just as we've kind of become efficient throughout the year, and finding some dollars, we earmark that, but we've done just a good job of earmarking funds and not using them and just keeping them for a rainy day, which times like now, there's access to excess capital, let's just say, if there were some projects we needed to do from money that's just kind of been earmarked over time.
Yeah. So fund balance you have to have, you can't operate with no with no net underneath this tightrope. That's kind of effectively how I see and how I view fund balance. It is definitely one of those things that we are heavily questioned about with respect to when we're going and meeting with these rating agencies and discussing our overall, the council strategy, our management philosophy, what we have planned for upcoming fund balance. They look at those things in terms of how we act and behave with respect to saving and making sure that we have something that gives us flexibility to zig when it's time to, when you get into a bad situation financially. So us having this budget is projecting that fund balance for general fund to come down to just shy of $14 million. So $13.9 million is what this current iteration of the budget is projecting. Now, that does not mean that we have $14 million of cash sitting in the bank. What that basically means is that through the course of many years, we might have projected to have, certain revenues and expenses, and maybe things came in less on expenses, which gave us more change left over, so to speak. And basically all that is referring to is the balance of which we have to be able to act and conduct business if we need to in a dire situation, or in a situation where council has objectives. For instance, The solar panels might be one of those uses of fund balance where a strategic initiative is and the opportunity presents itself to be able to utilize those balances to do something having more of a long range benefit for the city. So the fund balance is something that we have to have. We cannot operate as a city. That's one of those things that, as we talk about being exemplary rated, being AA plus or potentially AAA with our rating agencies, if you want to change some of those things pretty quickly, you start eroding that fund balance, and then you will hear from some people.
Yeah. Definitely. That's never really the plan. I know that there's some things that we've looked at here recently as ways that it's kind of, there's opportunities to use some of the dollars that are available to accomplish a goal, knowing that if we're able to get the deal done, can kind of replenish and come back and, allow us to make some strategic decisions for the city that are going to allow us to make some big improvements, hopefully, that move us forward with some areas that I know the residents want to see continuing to get developed the right way. And so, it's good that we've had and have maintained those kind of levels. And I know that's an important piece of it for council as well as staff, because the reason we structure it the way we do is to keep those levels, healthy. And I kind of, and for people listening, just want to maybe outline the steps going forward, as the budget retreat is about to happen, where do we go from here over the next, 4 meetings that get us from draft budget, conversations, retreat, let's explain and digest and discuss this in more detail. But then where do we go from there, from setting the tax rate to approving the budget and then moving forward, just so that we can kind of explain that for, anyone watching that's going to want to dive in and follow along over the next 2 months.
Okay, so from here, so the draft of the budget has been presented. As I said at the top of our conversation, normally the moving pieces that still exist are more germane to things that the council wants to tweak or change about the budget. So in addition to having those things which still exist and that we, fully expect to have some conversations from council that'll result in us changing some things about the budget, we also know that we're keeping our eye on what we're doing with respect to debt and what is happening in terms of that sales tax number. So we'll continue to update those things and provide updated drafts of the budget on our website as well as to our council. On September 15th, that is the date that, should council decide to move forward with the certificates of obligation with respect to the library, that's the meeting in which council would approve the sale of those bonds. That information, it would be probably the last piece of the puzzle, because by August 20th, we'll have the sales tax number pretty well tied. The property tax number pretty well tied down. And then ultimately on September 21st is the day that we would come and ultimately set the tax rate, which in this current year's budget, in addition to doing all of the things that we talked about, pay-go funding infrastructure, the debt is factored in there for their library, a number of things, and keeping the general fund expenditures relatively flat compared to last year. There is still a 1 cent reduction in sales tax. Why do I keep saying sales tax? Property tax. There is a 1 cent reduction in the property tax rate, which is really exciting, that has also been factored in. Lastly, the other thing that I think hopefully some of our residents will be excited to hear is this is the first year of implementation of our larger over 65 senior exemption. So it goes from 65,000 as an exemption to 80,000. So hopefully some of our seniors in the community will see and feel a little bit more relief with respect to that. We've calculated that it would roughly be about a 4 cent reduction, depending on your values and all of that. But we calculated it'd be about a 4 cent reduction to the seniors in our community. So those are kind of the key steps. And we encourage anyone who has questions about the budget to come to any of the upcoming meetings that council has. there's always a citizens comment section where you can ask any questions. I would love to be able to help individuals with questions. I really just don't want this to be a mystery or something where people feel like it's unapproachable. Everybody else gets questions and, people want to talk about their stuff. Nobody wants to talk about my budget.
Yeah. We got to talk to our finance super friends. That's for sure. And so, appreciate you outlining that and sharing that, because I think a lot of people are going to want to know those steps and which meetings they should probably come to in the whole process of when we're setting rate, when we're enacting and moving forward with the next year. And so that's great to outline. I just want to say thank you again for your leadership and the amount of work and energy you put in to get us to this point, because this is one of the most crucial steps for our city in terms of setting, the next year and outlining the plan and the budget and how we're going to accomplish all the things that we set out to accomplish in our strategic planning session to keep moving Farmers Branch forward and to continue revitalizing and hopefully taking the steps that we've taken in terms of, we're trying to reduce the rate. We're trying to make it more affordable to live here, and we're trying to add more amenities and services. And we wouldn't be able to do that without you and your leadership and helping all of our departments plan and say, hey, here's what you can afford and here's what you can't. And so, just want to say thank you for that. But, as with normal,
well, thank
normal
you for
shows,
saying that. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's a great team that I work with here in the finance area who really take their job and their directives seriously in terms of making sure that we're running the finances of the city with utmost, keen eye to making sure that we're doing the right things with respect to people's public dollars.
Absolutely. And so, as I usually end most of these shows, I have a few just quick questions I got to ask you. And we all know about your that shoe collection.
Oh my goodness.
I have to go with favorite designer. Whoa.
Shoe?
Yep.
Tamara Mellon. She
okay.
Yeah, I know you thought I was going to say, red bottoms or something like that. Tamara Mellon, look her up. She used to, she's a co-founder of Jimmy Choo and set out to do her own thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I like her story and I like supporting that brand.
Well, I was going to throw out, was it Louboutin or was it Manolo or was it Chew? So, you throw out a new one, but good to hear that she came from a good house and is out doing their own thing. That's awesome.
This is how that I'm getting older because I used to love Louboutins, but they hurt your feet so bad.
They're just for show. They're just for show. Everyone knows they're for show.
It's just a lot of work you got to do to get that shoe in, and I don't want to hurt anymore as an older lady.
Exactly. And then you get the panic of scuffing the bottom piece that, always touches the concrete in the ground.
I know how to fix that. Anybody out there who, has questions, I have a plan that you can fix that.
You can keep them cleaned up. And then kind of last question. I always get it wrong, but it's to me, love me.
To me, love me.
So how important is I look at that as you're a very confident woman and individual, and how has that kind of played into who you are as a person and how you've lived your life and excelled in the capacities that you have?
To me, love me is kind of a mantra for myself, meaning like I work really hard at what I do, and you could very easily get lost in all of that and not stop to enjoy it along the way. Enjoy that time with your family and your friends. And so to me, love me is a thing that I say to myself when I'm, have put in a bunch of work and I'm going to go get a pair of shoes or whatever it is to me, love me. But yeah, that is so funny that you asked me about to me, love me. I
love it. I've always thought it was great. And every time I see it, I'm just like, I like that. And just knowing who you are, how inspiring you are. And we're thankful to have you and for the work that you do. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share some of that, because I think that's something that other people should learn from and maybe use for themselves as well, as kind of, hey, we all have our self-worth. We all can be confident people and achieve our dreams and move forward. And I think you're a testament to that every single day.
Nobody should be better at treating you good than you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Well, Sherrelle, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your insight into the budget. And I know there's going to be a lot more conversation as we move forward regarding a lot of these things and important decisions that we're making for our community during this tough time. So look forward to engaging with you and your team on your leadership as we try to nail down a final budget and how we're going to move forward for the 2020-2021 year for the City of Farmers Branch. But with that, I just want to say, thanks for everyone who's been watching Mornings with the Mayor. Again, your host, Robert Dye. We're doing our best to keep you updated, to keep you informed, and to keep you thinking, especially as it relates to the important decisions we're making here at the city. So we'll be back in a few weeks with a new show. Until then, stay safe, stay positive. We'll talk to you soon.